How we doing, everybody? It's a Saturday morning. I am not DJing yet, which it's tough for me. I should be in the city right now, being almost set up and ready to start playing. And I know there's a lot of people who are in the audience who already are messaging me and wondering why I'm not there. And it's a tough thing, but we're gonna get through it. I want to thank everybody who's bought merchandise the last few weeks. It's helping out. I'm getting close to having my monthly bills paid, and then Patreon again. There's been a few new subscribers there, and it's definitely helping. I did pick up a gig tonight, ironically for the black community. A bunch of my old friends in the Twin Cities asked me if I could do a Halloween party for them. It's pretty last minute, and once again we're in some kind of a community center social house. It's not a bar, not a club, it's not a hotel. It's a building, from the looks of the photos I've seen, that the average white folk wouldn't even want to have a party in. But all the same, it's going to be a great bunch of people and fellowship, and I'm excited to play for them, and I'm thankful. And it's the easiest thing in the world playing for them. You just touch on the 60s, give them some 70s and 80s, a little bit of 90s, and a few current things, and keeping that R&B and rhythm and strain, and for the most part they'll be thrilled. They're not nearly as judgmental or trying to be cool as the average white audience, so it's a pretty stress-free environment if you know your black music. And so, you do have to connect dots and make it make sense. You can't just be abstract about it. And dancing does become more of an issue. With white folks, you don't got to be so worried about tempos and keeping a party going. Once black folks start dancing, you do have to kind of maintain that BPM and that vibe. And black folks don't by any means need to be drunk to dance. In fact, if they get too much drink in them, they often will stop dancing. It's not a very common thing from my experience to see black folks in public too intoxicated. And I've seen it a lot. White folks, for the most part, either don't dance or need to be drunk to do it. It's fairly unanimous. The average white male doesn't dance. And there are some white males that do. They were raised in the theater, perhaps, but there's not a lot of white guys coming out to the club, especially a club full of black guys and black women as well. They feel comfortable getting on that dance floor and dancing with them. And it was pretty rare. And often it was the gay guys who were used to being kind of not really a part of not worried about not fitting in. They've spent their whole life being, outsiders to some degree. And I often found that even though the gay community and the black community doesn't always see eye to eye, that they share a mutual oppression that did lend to an open tolerance of each other. It wasn't very often we'd have a party of gay folks come into our R&B nights, but once in a while it happened, and it was pretty fun. White women will dance, obviously, especially with black men, but it does take a certain level of intoxication for most of them. And one of the funny things I've always kind of noticed is either they don't know how to dance, or they kind of dance like strippers. And they learn how to dance watching rap videos. White women, you don't see black women dancing like they're on the pole very often. Once in a while, you'll see them get down, real low, do that booty tweak and all that. But for the most part, it's white girls who think they're on the pole and think they're being a good dancer when they're really just being kind of dance strip club. But it takes all stripes. It takes all folks to make this world be what it is. So I'm thankful to have a gig tonight at least. That'll also help me pay my bills for this month, and then we'll move on to next month and see where we're at. I'm going to have to start looking for work here, obviously. We'll see what shape that takes. Finding a gig in Rochester that's going to be anything like what I was doing in the cities isn't going to be easy. And they won't pay me what the cities pays me, I'm pretty sure. But whatever. I'm thankful to be working tonight anyway, I'll say that. Next I want to touch real quick on this new Coltrane. Live in Seattle. Love Spring. My friend David Yoshida, who was so kind to gift me with that box of Canadian Yummies last month, a few weeks back. When I told him I didn't have this and my money wasn't going to allow me to even get it, he offered to buy it for me and sent it to me without even telling me. He's like, after he bought it, he sent me a message saying, you should have it next Thursday. And I got it yesterday, and I listened to parts of it and I listened to the rest of it this morning. And first of all, the packaging is really wonderfully done. You know, really embracing the gatefold and the lovely color and graphic dynamic of what Impulse was always about. So the graphics are just wonderful. Secondly, as you've seen probably in other reviews on this record, the horns are somewhat suppressed. And the fact there's an S on that, horns, is a bit of a problem for me. The drums, especially, are pronounced and out in front. When Elvin's not going too hard, you can hear the two bass players, which I'm not sure why they really need two bass players. It's a bit cacophonic to have the need to have two bass players because you're not really hearing them through the mix. And then McCoy Tyner is more prevalent here. You can hear him with his block chords and his sounds and hearing more what McCoy is about. But a lot of time expires between the release of my favorite, Love Supreme, and this version of Love Supreme. And this has them during 65, which for Coltrane was a incredible year of change, a volume of work that's really unprecedented. Takes and retakes. Entire albums were being re-recorded with different lineups. It was a really incredibly densely packed year of activity. And the list of records he puts out in 65, of which some of those come out later, but were recorded in 65, both live and studio recordings. I did an episode on about probably a year ago. It's like 18 records or something. It's incredible what Coltrane's body of work is. Of course, he was well documented and recorded, and so that means that I think a lot of guys in jazz worked just as hard, but didn't get everything they did recorded quite the same way. You know, and Miles put more time in between his work and his records, and Coltrane was just idea after idea. And as I've often said before, I feel like his mortality, his health was in decline. He knew it, and I think there was an urgency that was placed on what he did that impacts and affects his trajectory. Things rev up quicker, and he moves through gates and doorways really rapidly, trying to get through as much exploration as he can in his time here on this earth. I've heard people say it's a great chapter or compendium to A Love Supreme, and I think that's a generous billing. It's first and foremost, if you're not a Coltrane fan, not a big fan, not a completist, you don't need this record. It's quite different from the original. It's quite expanded. There's a lot of added percussion that to me actually adds a layer of cacophony and kind of clouds the water somewhat. They add a second tenor player in Pharoah Saunders, and if you follow Coltrane through 65, Pharoah was kind of that prophet-like character that came to Coltrane and really validates what Coltrane's trying to do in Coltrane's mind himself. I feel like Coltrane was empowered by the support of Pharoah Saunders, and I don't think it's any secret that Elvin Jones and McCoy Tyner were getting weary of some of the cacophony, some of the dissonance, some of the endless tracks that just went bent on delving deep into the secrets of the universe. They longed, I think, more for the blues and melody and fun. And some of the stuff is not fun. It's very strict business. It's very strictly delving into the dark side of the arts. And if you're not a Coltrane guy to the extent of where you love Sunship and you love Ohm and you're a fan of Ascension and you love Kula Said Mama and you're not afraid of any of that, Live at the Village Vanguard again, if you're into that period of Coltrane and you're a completist, you'll love this and it'll be a nice addition to your Love Supreme wallet. But if you're a beginner in jazz, if you're a beginner to Coltrane, you're not really familiar with his career arc per se, stick with the original Love Supreme. And there's a lot of Coltrane you should buy before you feel compelled to buy this. I've been somewhat surprised by some of the reviews I've seen on Facebook and YouTube. I think some people are hesitant to be critical, and I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just trying to be honest. This is not going to be accessible to most people. My wife would not tolerate me playing this in the car, and yet my wedding band has a Love Supreme etched into it as a sound wave. So the original record is something that she's familiar with, and I'm not going to say she puts it on when I'm not around, but she's okay with that first record. This one's not something I would submit for her review. It's very intense, it's dark. Like I said, Pharoah Saunders really gives Coltrane ally to push his music into places that I think Alvin and McCoy might have hesitated at. And it's not even a secret that McCoy and Alvin aren't in the group much longer. This marks the last months of their time in that great quartet. And I think Coltrane was kind of hiding his health issues somewhat from the people around him, including his bandmates. And you could always tell when someone's declining, but I think Coltrane did a pretty good job kind of not sharing too much. And in retrospect, it's easier to see that mission culminating and being pushed towards a frothing point where I need to clear the palate. But for McCoy and Alvin, it got to be a little bit too much. The percussion on the record, I think, is played by Coltrane and Pharoah Saunders when they're not playing. And like I said, it's what ends up happening here. And there's a second horn player, an alto player, who I'm actually not that familiar with. Carlos Ward plays alto saxophone, and Donald Raphael Garrett plays the bass, as well as Jimmy Garrison. And for the most part, when the horns are playing, you don't really hear the bass players much at all. It ends up going from one man's personal prayer to the universe, the original recording. It's very singular in its intercession. The band seems to be very unified behind this man in his prayer to the cosmos. The first one's a very spiritual record. It's a very sincere but singular quest. And so even though it gets fairly deep and dark in places, being that it's one horn player with a very sympathetic group behind him, it still stays quite clear in mission statement. This one, the waters are much more muddied. There's horns going different directions at different times. It's not clear to see who's praying and who's like it's over the top of each other. The dissonance is really up here. And of course, Coltrane's career has gone that direction in the ensuing year and a half, 2 years since The Love Supreme has come out. And so what you end up here is with a very cacophonous version of The Love Supreme that rarely has the soft, gentle, melodic breaks, the atmospheric, spiritual moments. It does have a few moments of recession where it gets into softer passageways, but the refrain of A Love Supreme, they don't really even seem to state that. I've only listened to the whole thing once, and I was even kind of a distracted listen parts of it, but it's, again, if you're a deep Coltrane completist, it's absolutely a great piece to have, and to hear one more page of the Coltrane diary be filled out. But we're already talking about an artist who, there are a few people who have more documentation of their work over a finite period of time than Coltrane in the mid-60s. Like, there's not a lot of guys that put out that much work. Live records and alternate takes and, like I said, re-recording records with different lineups. And as Pharoah Saunders becomes more of a prominent member in the group, and Rashid Ali ends up coming in and playing the drums, and eventually Alice Coltrane comes in and plays the piano. Coltrane's career is definitely changing rapidly. So it's one more piece to add to that incredible body of work that he does in '65. Live in Seattle. I think the Tokyo concerts were from '65. It's a whole long list. I made the episode. It's a pretty incredible testament to this man's perseverance in spite of health issues. But for people who are acting like it's a nice necessity to love Supreme, it's not that. It's, as these things are, it's something that they felt was marketable. You know, they found the tapes, and that's great. And if you're deep into the cacophony of this era, it'll be very comfortable to those people. But what I hate to see happen, as I've said many times, is for someone new to jazz, just dipping their toe in. And there's these people reviewing this saying, oh, this is essential, you gotta have it, great stuff. And they put this on and go, what's going on? Elvin really kind of washes over a lot of the other sounds a lot of the time. And there's times where it just sounds like the cacophony of the Grateful Dead doing drums in the late 60s, where it was psychedelic and just tumbling and without shape or form. So I feel the spirituality, the integrity and message of the first record doesn't shine through quite the same. Instead of one missionary, one prophet praying to the cosmos, you suddenly have multiple voices trying to speak and trying to express, and it's an interesting musical statement. But again, it's not the easiest listen by any means. And I wouldn't say it's a necessity unless you're really a completist. Again, thank you, David Yoshida, for your kindness, especially in this time of financial stress for me. And every one of you who's been helping out with Patreon and buying merchandise, the few people who sent me money on PayPal, it's more than appreciated. I always want to keep my integrity high. So for me to come out and just laud this and praise this like it's an absolutely essential record that everyone need to have, I feel would be very dishonest. It's packaged really nice, as the Impulse legacy would demand. And it does document a very great man towards the end of his short but incredibly voluminous career. The man has a lot of work. And by no means do I think, if you don't have Giant Steps and Coltrane Sound and Blue Train and some of the early Prestige work, if you're missing a lot of that early, you don't have Ellington and ballads and some of the other pieces that will fill out your knowledge of Coltrane, this is not something you should dive into. And of course, there's the caveat that sometimes these records are harder to come by down the road. Some of these records become very limited in their release, and if you don't get it when you can, you might not be able to. But I feel like that's kind of what they're relying on. A lot of people are going to be scared to not buy it. And from my experience, if there's a demand, there will always be a repressing of something eventually. So it kind of depends on where you're at in your jazz journey. If you've got that veteran knowing what you're doing, love that 60s sound, that's you, then of course it probably is an essential piece and a great chapter to the man's wonderful journey. But again, if you're just kind of new to jazz, by all means, please buy something you're going to love and enjoy and play multiple times. I'll be honest, I'm not going to play this very often. I don't play Love Supreme that often. You know, I do play it probably once or twice a year. This one will probably get less play than that. I'll probably skip it on again here in a few days to give it one more playthrough. But it's not by any means an easy, digestible listen. It's a pretty intense, and I think it's something you probably would love and enjoy and be able to get into more if you're actually there. I think it would probably be very enveloping and very just powerful, that live performance. So I imagine if you were there, it'd be something that would be quite uh, memorable. But as we all know, that these great jazzmen were playing to pretty small houses at this point. Jazz wasn't playing to the crowds of tens of thousands by this point. You're playing to probably 500 people, I would guess, in most of these theaters and clubs, and it was a different day for jazz. You know, aside from Newport and a few festivals, there wasn't a lot of places where jazz cats were going to go out and play for tens of thousands. And that's one of the weird things, again, about jazz and race, is that these white jazz players from this era had the opportunity to play a lot of the white colleges. And that's not something that was open to the black musicians. So these white cats would go to a college and play in front of 3,000 kids and make more money and have more exposure than all the black originators and innovators ever got. You know, it's really a crying shame how many white cats made a good living off this black music, and a lot of these black cats really were hand to mouth. And Coltrane was making good money by this point. The Impulse contract was paying him pretty well, from my understanding. Miles Davis, of course, was making pretty good money. But that put pressure on Miles and Coltrane too, I'm sure, to make content that was going to sell to justify what you're being paid. And of course, Miles seems very much aware of that stress, and Coltrane seems almost immune to it. And he does concede early in his Impulse career and make ballads and Ellington, Hartman, some of those records that are pretty accessible. But really by 63, 64, 65, there's not a lot of easily digestible Coltrane in that mix. Crescent and A Love Supreme are probably the last two records he makes that are easy listening. He makes a record with just Rashid Ali and him. I think it's called The Interstellar Space, or it's just the two of them. And you would not believe how much noise a tenor sax and a drummer can make. It's a very difficult listen that I think I've rarely sat through all sides of it. It's a tough record. So you gotta always admire Coltrane. You know, he just dug deep and played hard, and always with the highest level of integrity. And for me, it's his integrity, his sincerity, his honesty. It's the one thing that always allows me to enter into his chambers and open my ears up to things that are difficult listens at times. You know, they're not always just the sweet sound of candy. And some of it's fairly bitter and acerbic stuff. But again, the genuine sincerity of the man is always going to speak volumes to a person like myself. It means a lot to me. So again, it's maybe not the review everyone wants to hear. Everyone wants to hear that, oh, I bought this record and everyone says it's great. And I think for most people, buying a record, for their mind, oh, it's great, I own it. But there's a lot of misguiding going on. A lot of people who are unqualified to say certain opinions share them anyway in the internet world. You know, so many people will say, oh, that's the best Milt Jackson record ever. And how many Milt Jackson records you got? Because he made 60, 70, 80 records. You know, to say that's the best Milt Jackson, I hope you quantify that with saying it's the best Milt Jackson of the four that I know. I mean, that honestly needs to exist. And yet, Facebook especially, man, these Facebook jazz groups, I see so many people see a record post like, oh, that's my favorite, that's his best. And I'm guessing some of you have complete bodies of work by some of these artists and are capable of sharing that opinion. But I feel like there's a lot of people who just go, oh, I have that record, I love it, therefore it's great. And I think it's one of the most asinine ways to review something. Because when you have enough records, when you get over a certain point, a certain hump, it's only then when you can start being objective about stuff that you own. When you go from the point of, I own it, I love it, it's great, to I own it, I don't play it very often, it's not for everyone. That's when objectivity can kind of be more a reasonable reference point for other people. It takes a while to get to that point, because I know myself when I was early collector in jazz, probably the first 2,000 jazz records I had, they were all great. All amazing. And there's not bad jazz records in the sense of a guy can't play. These guys can all play. It's just a matter of how much dissonance, how much cacophony, how much chaos do you want to embrace on a regular daily basis. And even myself, with some of my raised stress levels lately with my stepson and with my work situation, I found a little more dissonance and cacophony creeping into my listening. I've played a few things lately that were a little bit more on that edge because I had a mood in my life that was more relevant and comparable to that sound. And I think that also is kind of a revealing thing. It makes some of the people that sit around listening to cacophony all the time and dissonance all the time are maybe somewhat troubled, unsatisfied, maybe heartache. There's things that are probably playing in that person's life that doesn't allow just the joyful, happy sounds of jazz to have much relevance to them on a regular basis. You know, and I could be off with that, but that's my feeling. Is someone's always playing that angry, dissonant, out there stuff. Same thing with metal. You know, the guys who are playing the most angry stuff, it's telling you something about them and the state of mind that they're in all the time. You know, if you feel unloved and feel no girl wants to be with me and I have no good relationships in my life, that's going to make you want to listen to music that feels kind of angry and pushing people away and creating a barrier between you and the world. I know myself, as I met my wife and we got into falling in love 7-8 years ago, it changed my feelings towards the world I lived in. And it made it easier to want to listen to the sweeter, softer sounds, A, for her comfort level, but also because I wasn't as agitated and as upset and as angry and as unsatisfied as that other side of me was, being alone, being hurt, being rejected, abandoned, being stupid and young. All those things come into play. And so I think it's hard to be middle-aged and content and sit around listening to aggressive music all the time. And I think it's hard to be middle-aged and bitter and unsatisfied and lonely and to sit around listening to joyful music all the time. Truth is, the blues, that simpler, more joyful music, is meant to help us through some of those things. But that's just my perception. And I'm sure some people will argue with that, which is great. I'm totally okay with that. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. I'm going to go do this gig in the cities with my black community. Hopefully a lot of my old friends show up. I know there'll at least be 50, 60 of them there that I know, and probably another 100 people that I don't know very well. But again, it's going to be great to see some old faces. Y'all be safe. Have a great night. Happy Halloween to everybody. If you haven't supported the channel, now would be a great time to go to Patreon just to help me out through this little thinner time financially. Or if you don't want to do that, go to the merchandise store in the information below and grab a hoodie, grab a coffee cup, grab a pair of socks. There's lots of cool stuff in the merch store for people to, you know, to flip through and you find something that draws your attention and help me promote the channel by wearing the Jazz Shepherd stuff out there in the world. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. Hopefully the Halloween pumpkin gets you. Peace.